And we are live today with our special guest, the Jerz, who's joining us from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And he's going to be talking to us today about internationalizing your life, offshoring, and what are the latest trends in this industry? What's happening with people going abroad? Has the demand increased since the election? And are we seeing how is the industry changing? How are people changing what they're doing in terms of insourcing and outsourcing their life? So without further ado, we're joined by the Jerz. He is a friend of a friend, former guest Francisco Gonzalez that we had on the program last year. He knows him well, and he's also met our ESW Southern Cone writer, David Siegel. They had a drink a few months ago. So without further ado, the Jerz, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the introduction. Looking forward to this.
Yeah. So tell us, you're an Austrian, an American citizen of Austrian extraction. How did you get in the industry?
So it all started, my original background was in real estate development in Florida in the 2000s. And then when the market crashed in 2008, I'd done pretty well. I made some money. I said, okay, I'm going to take a few months off, 6 months maybe, and travel around Latin America. And 6 months sort of turned into a year, turned into 5 years, turned into 10 years. So pretty soon into that journey, I found myself in Buenos Aires. This is maybe a year in. And at that point, I said, okay, I like this. I don't think I'm going to go back maybe to the United States. So I said, okay, the first thing I've got to do is figure out how to get myself a second citizenship. And so I looked at the different routes, and this is a long time ago. This is 2008, 2009. So there just wasn't as much information about this space, certainly online. So the research was very difficult to do. And it sort of came about, I had a couple choices, not unlike today. You could do the citizenship by investment. You could sort of live in a country for a long period of time, do it through residency. Or if you were lucky enough to have ancestors from certain European countries, you could do citizenship by descent. And I really knew nothing about my family history. I'd never met my grandfather, who I ended up getting the citizenship from. He died when my dad was a little kid. So sort of, I started interviewing my family, finding the history. And as it turned out, I did have the Austrian descent. And I just said, okay, I've got time. I'm going to figure out how to do this myself. And so I went through the process. It was a multi-year process. At that time, I had no idea what I was doing. And I just sort of figured it out. And when I was done, friends, family started coming to me, and they're very like, hey, that's really cool. Can you help me? So for the first number of years, I just sort of did it for fun because I sort of enjoyed doing the research and helping people. And that's where I started doing the citizenship by descent. And it just sort of grew and grew. After a few years, I started doing it as like more of like a hobby business. I started charging, but I wasn't actively marketing, promoting, doing anything. And then in 2020, when COVID hit, it exploded. And that's when I really started doing the marketing, doing the Twitter, and growing it, doing it as my primary business.
Yeah, and tell us about that too. I mean, it also maybe in the course of your travels, you met a young woman from Venezuela, right, Gabrielle?
That's correct.
Yeah. So tell us about that, because she's really phenomenal in terms of teaching Spanish and Portuguese to foreigners, expats who want to come down or in the process of relocating, or some who've already relocated to Latin America. Is that right?
Absolutely. So we met a few years ago, 3 years ago. We actually met on Twitter, which is an interesting place to meet somebody. But we met on Twitter, then we met in Bogota, and we started dating, and it's been great because we, from the very beginning, we had very complementary businesses. She was helping expats with the Spanish, and then later with the Portuguese, and so it was a really good fit from the business standpoint. And I started helping her and sort of helping her grow the language schools. And at the same time, she started helping me with the residencies and citizenships, especially she speaks 6, 7 languages. So it really helps. You know, if we get a French customer, we get an Italian customer, Gabby's the one who will talk to them.
And the trends you and your wife are seeing right now, with for our audience, because our primary business is just so you're aware and the audience is aware, is that we're primarily involved in developing an app for international real estate. We also do gold vaulting and
Mm-hmm.
large scale, let's say, crypto liquidity transactions where there's a large amount of crypto involved. So that's kind of the triangular core of our business. We are doing residencies as well, and citizenship by investment programs in the Caribbean. But that being said, our primary focus has been on real estate and the including the Middle East and North Africa region, with a focus on Dubai and the UAE, where we have partners on the ground. But I did want to speak to you about this topic of LATAM and how are we seeing more Europeans, both Europeans and Americans, wanting to leave the EU and wanting to leave the United States, and Canadians wanting to leave Canada to head to Latin America because they see it as a continent where, essentially, with the possible exception of Colombia and a lot of the narco violence in Ecuador, there's no war going on there, right? So that's part of it, and also just the fact that a lot of people are not happy with the United States government, whether for partisan or nonpartisan reasons, and they want to leave. And the same with the EU, I'd imagine, with the very high tax burden. So Paraguay is a country that has attracted, I know, a lot of expats for tax registry reasons, but you have to do it right. I mean, you have to really register your center of life there. You can't just like fly in and fly out always easily without having some sort of proof of center of life, because the EU
Exactly.
tax man and the British tax man, they're getting more strict all the time in terms of demanding proof if you claim you have a residency somewhere else. Is that right?
It is, and I think LATAM really has become more prominent on the radar in the last, say, 5 or 6 years. So in the same time span that I've really geared up the business, ironically, both Europeans, Americans, Canadians, Australians, from the typical traditional first world countries, were really seeing more of an interest and more of a migration to Latin America. And yes, a lot of it, as you mentioned, there are people who do it for the tax reasons, to establish a business. But I think a lot of people are also looking as the region as very strategic, given all of the turmoil and uncertainty in the world. If you look at the different regions, the Mideast has its problems. Europe now very much has problems with what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. Asia, somewhat of a powder keg with Taiwan, what China's doing. Latin America is like the last bastion, this like almost forgotten region that if the worst case scenario were to happen, I'm 100% convinced it would be the best region in the world to be. And even for, I think, a lot of people who say, okay, I still have those ties. I can't leave my family. My family can't come. Their kids are in school. My business is still in Europe. It still is very logical to set something up in this region as a plan B, because we don't know what's going to happen in the world. And in the event of that worst case scenario, as we saw with COVID, once the event happened, it's sort of too late. If you don't have your documents, you don't have your papers in place, it's too late. You can't really do anything at that point. So we're seeing a lot of movement, not just on the tax side, but on the Plan B side, and a lot of people moving to this region. Whether it's Paraguay, they want something that's zero tax, very remote. They want to buy a piece of land and live away from everything. To people who have come to Argentina, excited about what Milei's doing. Brazil, Mexico's seen a huge amount of growth. Colombia, of course. It's not isolated to a specific country. It's the entire region that's really exploding.
Yeah, and I think that's another part of the story that people are missing is that there are immense opportunities in Latin America, and certainly if you can provide high quality service with your international business, in terms of high quality customer service, higher better use of technology, of apps, of things of that nature, you can really create a competitive niche for yourself. And a lot of these countries, they are so-called middle income countries by global standards. I mean, maybe Chile is considered, first world by, according to the standards of the last Cold War, and Uruguay as well. But those labels are increasingly less and less relevant because in countries like Venezuela, you have a lot of wealthy people, and obviously you have a lot of poor people, and Brazil is a similar story. But yet you also have these middle to upper middle income countries like Uruguay that are seen as, and Chile, that are seen as historically as safe havens, or have been at least since the 1990s. And it's interesting that you mentioned the tax opportunities. I mean, it's very important for people to get proper advice when they do that, because as I said, the tax man in Europe and the UK and maybe even the IRS is quite, and the Canadian counterpart are quite greedy in terms of proving that you actually have some center of life in these countries, that it's not always enough just to fly in and get your residency in Paraguay and fly out. And I think that's where your company and companies, many of the companies in the space come in, right? Is it giving people the quality advice on what's the latest trend and what's really going on in terms of the offices, how they're regulating things, and what you need to do beyond just filling out the paperwork.
Absolutely, and it's not just staying up with the rules; it's really understanding them. This is a question I get a lot from potential clients. Um, they'll look and they'll say, "Oh, okay, I found somebody in Paraguay who can do the residency for $500, for $1,000," and while that may be true, it's one part of the puzzle. So really, if you're looking to internationalize, you're looking to do it legally, and you're looking to create a structure that's not going to come back and end up causing you more problems than had you done nothing. The important thing is to understand a residency is just a residency. Okay, it's a good thing to have. It can be a plan B, something to have in your back pocket. But you have to look at the overall picture. You have to look at, where's your business located? How does your business make money? Where does that money flow through? Where do you do your banking? Where do you spend most of your time? Have you properly filled out the exit papers from your country? Have you cut those ties? Have you sold your property, gotten rid of your bank accounts? There's so many different factors to consider, and a residency is just one of those factors. So it's really important that everybody understands, if the primary goal is, hey, I want to pay zero tax, or I want to lower my overall tax burden, it's doable, but it involves an all-encompassing strategy. And you're really doing more harm than good if you try to take shortcuts and look for the cheapest option. Because honestly, there are a lot of people in this space who just try to sell for the sake of selling to make a little bit of money, and they don't have the knowledge, and even with the specific product, like somebody who's just selling a Paraguayan residency might not fully understand the procedure, so somebody can successfully terminate that process and successfully have that residency. But they really have no idea about, how does the residency work with an LLC? How does the money flow through the LLC, and how do you spend that money personally when you're not in your home country, not in Paraguay, but in Bali, in some country around the world? And that's really what we specialize in, is helping somebody see that big picture and navigate it, because it's not something that most people can successfully do for themselves.
Yeah, and this is the other thing too that I think a lot of people don't understand, is that it's not just about the government. And there are a lot of places where, frankly, people have settled in spite of the government, like let's say a Colombia or an Argentina, because they like the lifestyle. They have a life partner there that they
Mhm.
found, or they're looking for a life partner, especially middle-aged single men, a lot of divorcees, or even some women too. And I think that, I wanted to, but I did want to briefly touch on politics for a second, because we mentioned Javier Milei a few minutes ago. And, obviously Nayib Bukele in El Salvador has gotten most of the press in the United States, but Milei has also, let's say, in Europe, gotten a lot of attention for his reforms and what he's trying to do and trying to achieve in Argentina. And yet there's also still this sort of not only massive inflationary overhang from the previous Peronist government that was in power. Essentially, the Peronists were in power for decades, but also the fact that Javier Milei does not have full control over the country's monetary policy. This is a point that our ESW Southern Cone writer, who's based in Buenos Aires, David Siegel's made multiple times in his articles for us on our Patreon. By the way, we're up to about 310 pieces of content on the Patreon dating back to October 2023, and we're in the process of moving all that content over to our new site, ExitStrategyWorld.com, which will launch, we anticipate, sometime probably the Easter Pascha weekend that's coming up on April 20th. So I just wanted to put in that plug, but mainly ask you for your opinion about Milei's government and his finance minister, Caputo, I think it's Michael Caputo, and whether they can tame this inflationary beast, or if Argentina is going to kind of be doomed to repeat on a smaller scale maybe what happened in 2002 before. Your thoughts, sir?
I think Milei really has his work cut out for him. I was a big fan. I was rooting for him to succeed. And I like his original rhetoric. He came in, he was the first true libertarian. We're going to try all these libertarian policies. And for one reason or another, I think he's done a lot of stuff halfway. He hasn't been successful in fully implementing a lot of those libertarian ideas. A good example is the CEPO. Originally, they were going to get rid of that last year in the summer, and now best case it'll be this summer.
Could you elaborate on what the CEPO is for the audience who's not familiar with Argentine economics?
Sure. The CEPO is basically the artificial peg. The government has not allowed the currency to freely float against the dollar. So they only allow it to move so much per month. I think it's 1% per month. And the result of that has been Argentina has gotten terribly expensive. So to give context, when Milei took over and we were there, it was literally the cheapest country I'd ever been to, and I've been to a lot of countries. It was ridiculously cheap, and in less than a year, the prices went from ridiculously cheap to more expensive than pretty much anywhere I can think of. I mean, right now it's more expensive most things than if you go to Switzerland, you go to Dubai, you go to the super high cost countries. So, as an expat, as somebody who spends time there, it doesn't really hit me that hard. I just look at it. Okay, I'm buying I go out to a nice neighborhood, Parisia, and it's the same price as a restaurant in San Francisco. Okay, but for the locals, for the Argentinians, I have seen it firsthand. It's killing them. Most people have gone through savings that the families, been putting under the mattress for decades, and there just isn't money. So if the policies continue as is, I know in the last couple of months, the inflation picked back up again. He had contained it somewhat, but I also think I always say, well, yeah, you've sort of paused the inflation. It's not so much anymore, but the prices also tripled. There's not much room to inflate anymore. So I'm not sure I exactly agree with how he did it, how he brought down those inflation numbers. And what my guess is, unless there's a turnaround before the midterm elections, he's not going to do particularly well, which will make it that much harder for him to get his policies in, since he already doesn't have the full control. And if that happens, I think it'll it'll be one of those situations where he's gone in 4 years and they revert back to the policies that they had before. I hear on the ground a lot from Argentinians. They say, yes, we had this terrible inflation, but we had a really good quality of life. And at the moment, most Argentinians just do not have that same quality of life.
And that's a problem, because I think, how do they avoid a Corralito style blowout? But yet it's sort of like they're caught between the hammer and the anvil, in the sense of the global financial markets are hammering. They're betting on a massive devaluation again of the peso, which has already been massively devalued, versus avoiding that, but yet at the same time not crushing the tourism sector, which is very important, and the ag exports, making Argentinian agricultural exports, wines and everything else that it's the country's world famous for, super expensive on the world markets as well, and thereby crushing exports too. So it seems like they're caught, between the hammer and the anvil, and how are they going to figure this out? And it'll be interesting to see how they address the problem, because I certainly don't envy Milei. I think he's taken on the Augian stables Herculean task of clearing out 40 years of super inflationary Peronist waste and bureaucracy. But at the same time, people need to be realistic, and that's what David, our Southern Cone writer, has been writing about if you're going there, make sure you have a strong non-Argentinian source of income, that you have a bank account set up, you have a residency set up somewhere else. Ideally, Paraguay is one country over. Uruguay is another option. We're some of the best banking in Latin America, or Panama. So we hopefully are giving people good advice on how to approach Argentinian, because it's a beautiful country, amazing people. It really deserves way better than what it's had in terms of the levels of governance. But at the same time, people need to be realistic about approaching it. And I did want to get your thoughts too on a related note, because Argentina is perhaps the most Italian or Italianized country in Latin America in terms of descent, in terms of architecture, and some of the food maybe. And I wanted to get your take on what's happening in Southern Europe right now, with the economics of Northwestern Europe being in a pretty bad place, because they've been cut off from cheap Russian energy and raw materials, especially the Germans. And in terms of, and Austria too, I mean, the land of your grandfather, was pretty integral to the flow of Russian gas into Europe, and the storage of it. And I wanted to get your take on, there are people that are now saying that Italy, especially Southern Italy, not so much the North, is getting cheaper, and that there are more opportunities. Maybe Spain and Portugal are getting a little overpriced, overheated in terms of the massive backlog in their golden visa programs. I think last count I heard, Portugal was up to 140,000 people in the system backlog. I don't know what it is in Spain, but Italy is looking more attractive. Maybe Greece is getting more attractive, despite the high cost of living in Athens and a few other places, and the tourist magnets. And then one country we're taking a look at, we're pretty bullish on, is Bulgaria, because they just got admitted into the Schengen zone in January 1st. So we're looking at Bulgaria a lot. We have a dev team there that's working with us to build the app. So I wanted to get your take on Southern Europe in general. We can start with Italy and then sort of expand outward from there.
Well, I'm a big fan. I spent a number of years, sort of took a break for a while from LATAM, and actually went back to school in Spain. So I lived in Spain for a number of years. I agree with you. I think just sort of the economies and the costs, Europe can be attractive for an expat right now. Specifically, like you're saying, places in Southern Italy, there are a lot of sort of these untouched, less touristed spots where there's still exceptional value. And maybe the inflation has gone up in Europe too. I mean, it's gone up everywhere in the world since COVID, of course. But in a lot of respects, if you're coming with income that's not dependent on the location, I think Europe can be quite attractive. The one caveat to what you say, I think there's been a big trend in Europe because those golden visas, because the citizenship by descent have been so popular, there's actually a trend right now in the EU to limit or eliminate those programs. So, looking at the different countries, Portugal has cut way back. It's still alive, but there are a lot more restrictions now. Spain is supposedly ending their golden visa program. Citizenship by descent, you look what happened a couple weeks ago in Italy. Italy was always one of the easiest countries. Speaking to the reason why so many Argentinians were eligible, you were allowed to go back an unlimited number of generations.
Wow.
And
So even great grandparents or even great great grandparents, because, for
yes,
example, myself, I think I might be like 4 generations back for Norway, but I'm
mhm,
probably on my mom's side, but
but it's too far.
yeah, it's
For,
probably too far for Norway. And I
for
turned out,
Norway, so,
sorry, go ahead.
so, so I was going to say, so Italy always allowed you to go back an unlimited number of generations to the founding of Italy. The relative just had to have been in Italy after Italy became the modern day country. But what happened a couple of weeks ago, they passed a decree and now they're basically limiting it to grandparents. So it went from being the most lenient to one of the stricter citizenship by descent. Now, it isn't finalized yet because it was just a decree and now they're debating it. And then after the debate, they'll pass legislation and then it goes to the constitutional court. It might not even be constitutional what they're doing, but it just goes to speak to the larger trend, which is they want to make it more difficult for high net worth individuals, people who actually have the ancestry to do what I did and get the European passport. And it's interesting because
Ask you, Jerz, why is that? Why do you think that is? That what would motivate the Italian government to restrict, particularly given the country's major demographic problems that Americans have started to hear more about, thanks to Tucker Carlson and other hosts talking about the Bambino bust in Italy, some of the lowest birth rates in the world. Why would they be doing that, you think?
well, there's a lot of pressure coming from Brussels, from the EU. This is basically an EU directive to limit that, while at the same time they're encouraging migration from what they consider disadvantaged individuals. So at the same time that Italy's doing this, they're looking at legislation to legalize people with no Italian ties and give them Italian citizenship, whereas today these people would not be eligible. So they're just sort of changing the rules about who the demographic makeup of who they want, sort of for this future of Europe.
Right, and that's very ideological, and I don't want to get it too deep into that. Obviously, on this show, we don't have a lot of time today, but we can certainly have you back on in a few months to talk about it in more depth. But I do want to say that it does seem related to this broader agenda of changing the demographics of Europe, of making it a more, let's say, globalist or globalized Europe, for lack of a better term, and apologizing for the colonial past, whatnot, by just sort of
Exactly.
opening the borders, even though that's not necessarily what everybody of Maghrebi or North African origin really wants. In fact, I think one of the trends that I've observed that led me to start Exit Strategy World with my business partner, CEO, who's himself, first generation born in the U.S. to Kerala, Indian Christian parents, is this trend of the repat of people going back who have that origins, like you talked about, like your grandfather was Austrian. Maybe he left Austria after the war, or he was still there after the war, and so forth. That you have this trend of repatriation of Mexicans going back, of Salvadorians going back because they see more opportunities now. They can sell their house, especially if they happen to own a home in Southern California, and get cash out, buy a lot of land in El Salvador or Mexico for the same amount of what the equity they had in a home in California, etc. And it just strikes me as very strange, and I hope that there will be vociferous pushback by the Italian center right and right of center parties to this measure, because I think it's wrong. I think it's exactly sends the wrong message when these countries need more people of Italian descent, or who are at least willing to speak the language and learn it now more than ever, who are ethnically connected to them, whether that's the Greeks, the Italians, the Spaniards, the Portuguese as well, with obviously their strong connection with Brazil. I had my business partner, CEO, his partner in a sister company, Royal Amparo DMCC, who is now living in Dubai with his Brazilian wife. Actually, they were living in Sao Paulo, where her family, extended family, was from, and they moved to Portugal because to get away from a lot of the crime and congestion problems in Sao Paulo. They're living in the I think the southern coastal region of Portugal. I'm not sure if it's Algarve or what the region is called, but it just another associate of my CEO, a Greek American guy, Gus Demos, is in the process of getting his Greek passport. For him, it's easier because he's got his records of his dad, who was in the Hellenic Army in the early '70s. So it's relatively recent, right? He doesn't have to go that far back. But you're right that I believe the law is very similar to the Italian law in Greece, that if you had an ancestor who was residing in Greece when Greece obtained its independence from the Ottoman Empire, but it had to be within the territorial confines of Greece at that time, not what it became after World War I or whatever, then you qualify, but you have to look up the records and the genealogical records and the state records. And I think a lot of people end up hiring Greek attorneys to do that for them in Athens. So, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense to me, Jerz, why they're doing this other than wokeness, political correctness, globalism, whatever you want to call it.
I agree. I think it's gonna backfire, and it's a huge mistake. These European countries should want to celebrate their heritage, and they should want the people who have that ancestry, who have that blood, and who want to come back, who want to identify with the country. So I agree. It's a big mistake.
Yeah, and here's the other thing too that makes LATAM and Southern Europe, particularly let's say countries that are a little bit uh, less off the beaten path, like Bulgaria, more attractive, is not only the proximity to Turkey for if you're into international trade and import export, but also just the fact that um, you know you're not in a country. And this is a point that David Siegel keeps making on his X feed in his articles for us, is that you're not in a country that's most certainly going to get sucked into this war in Ukraine if it continues to just spiral and continue as a meat grinder conflict. Um, you're in a country that is at peace and wants to stay at peace, overwhelming majorities. And I think that that's the other factor here, is that are you going to start seeing wealthy families leave I mean, the UK is already, experiencing a mass exodus of millionaires to offshore destinations, to the Caribbean, to Dubai, to places like that. And they got rid of their non-dom registry in the UK. I think Spain was talking about 100% tax
Yeah.
on non-EU residents buying property in Spain. So you have this desire to sort of soak the rich, and yet other countries are opening up, are desperate to get capital, are desperate to get more people who are quality people who want to raise families, want to raise children. And so it seems like there's sort of a race in both directions. There's the more repressive, leftist or globalist ideology, and then there's the more, let's say, libertarian, or let's make our country a new Dubai spirit that you're seeing. I mean, in particular, for Muslims who've done really well in Europe or in the United States, I would think that you might want to take a look at, what they're doing in the UAE or what they're doing in Saudi Arabia, if you speak Arabic natively, to look at some of the opportunities there, because it's they're really opening things up, and they're very serious about trying to make their countries more business friendly. I'm not saying you should move there. I'm just saying, some people should start to look at some of the new possibilities out off the beaten path, including in Latin America, because I'm certainly hopeful that, once the peso situation stabilizes in Argentina, we will see a true golden visa program there, which it sort of hasn't been necessary before, because Argentinian residency was relatively easy to get before. But now that maybe they've tightened it up a little bit, it might make sense to offer golden visas in Argentina or in other neighboring countries like Bolivia, for example.
Well, I think the interesting thing is there are two ways to look at, okay, how do we pay for society? How do we pay for government? The position on the left is you do that through taxation. And that's sort of where the world's been at post-World War II, most of the major industrialized nations. But what's happened as those countries have spent more and more money, the taxation, the money printing, it's not enough. So, to speak to your first point, what we're seeing in Great Britain, a lot of these countries in Europe, they're simply out of money. And people, okay, maybe they can live with 30%, 40%, maybe even 50%. But there comes a point when people who are high net worth, who built successful businesses, have family money, whatever the case might be, there comes a point where they say, okay, it's enough. And you're getting to the point, like you spoke to Spain, 100% tax. Some of these countries are talking about taxing unrealized capital gains. You're talking about punitive taxation. And most people just aren't going to stand for that, especially successful, intelligent, high net worth individuals. And so then you sort of look at the other side, which is what these countries like Dubai, some of the Caribbean countries, Paraguay, Panama are good examples in Latin
You even
America.
have Sierra Leone trying to create
Sierra
I don't know if you've
Leone.
heard about this. Yeah, some sub-Saharan
Yeah,
African countries are getting in the game.
exactly. And the idea is, okay, you either attract through investment, or in the case of like Paraguay, Panama, you don't even necessarily have to invest in the country. It's just we want these high net worth individuals to come here and spend money. And this money they spend causes development, it creates businesses, which creates jobs. And what I'm seeing now is the countries that follow this model, Paraguay being a great example, Dubai being a great example, those countries are in much better financial shape than the traditional powers who have been taxing and taxing and printing and printing. And I think we're seeing this shift. And so the world sort of opens up, and people have these options now. It's like, okay, with the internet, with the possibilities to make money doing different kinds of things. Hey, I'm not tied down to London. I'm not tied down to Amsterdam, to San Francisco. I'm able to take my intellect, take my skills, and make money somewhere else. So then it becomes this competition to attract these individuals. And how do you attract them? Through favorable taxation, through business incentives. And so I really think the countries that are doing that are on the right track. And they will continue to boom. We'll continue to see a lot of success, Paraguay, UAE, and we'll see the traditional powers continue their slow decline.
Yeah, speaking of traditional powers, because your grandfather was Austrian, I did want to ask you about Germany and your opinion about Germany, because we've seen Friedrich Merz, the new incoming chancellor. He's formed a government that is essentially a kind of coalition of minority parties, because AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, they got the majority of the votes for all out of all the single parties. I mean, they got the plurality, excuse me, of votes, and yet they were, frozen out of the new government. The CDU formed I think they call it the Kenyan Flag Coalition, basically with the other parties. And what we're seeing now is Merz appears to be dusting off some of the Hagmarschaft playbook from the 1930s of military Keynesianism. I'm not saying he intends to go to war, but what I am saying is that he is he's breaking all the constitutional limits on spending in Germany that were supposed to prevent a depreciation of the currency back when it was the Deutschmark before it became the euro, and continued over to the euro when it was adopted in the early 90s. And what we're seeing is maybe some back to the future of the 1930s, because partly in reaction to what Trump is doing, but partly because there was this already pre-existing agenda of trying to turn the European Union into a super state, a Euro Reich, if you will. And
Yeah.
I wanted to get your opinion on that, because I'm wondering, are we going to see German wealthy families also? I mean, they've had in the past other options at hand, Switzerland and Liechtenstein. They're nearby in Europe, for those who are dual British, German. You had or who had those passports in the family. You had Jersey, you had the Isle of Man, various tax havens. But what do you see? Do you think that we could see more Germans starting to immigrate to leave Germany for places like Santa Catarina in the southern Brazil, where there's already a large German population? I know there's certainly some traces of the Germans who came over even before the world wars in Argentina and
Mhm.
Brazil. So I wanted to, I know Giselle Bundchen is a famous person, descendant from those German immigrants, early 20th century or late 19th century. So I want to get your opinion about Germany and the
Yeah.
coming wave of German immigration out of Germany.
So we're seeing a tremendous increase in the number of German clients, and I'll put a few others into that same bucket: Netherlands, France. So those traditional EU powers, Sweden's another one, and a big part of that reason is there's a lot of uncertainty and fear about pending legislation that's been debated or thrown around. And one of the biggest concerns for high net worth individuals is either exit taxation, which all of these countries have debated and are seriously looking into, whereby if you do want to leave and go to a place like Dubai, go to a Paraguay, you have to pay a tax based on your net worth today. So in a lot of cases, that means liquidating stock, liquidating property, that sort of thing. So you have the money to be able to pay this exit tax. And the other big fear that I see a lot of people have, which is why a lot of, say, Germans are looking to get one of these Latin American passports, they're throwing out a lot the possibility of some sort of citizenship based taxation, US style. So right now, the US is really the only relevant country in the world that taxes not based on where you live, or not based on the residency in the US, but they tax based on having the citizenship, having the passport. So as an American, yes, there are exemptions and whatnot, and there are strategies, but technically speaking, an American has to pay tax on his global income, even if he doesn't spend a single day in America. And as ridiculous as that sounds, that's the way it is. And a lot of the European countries are throwing out this idea because it's a money grab. As I said, they're looking at these huge deficits. They want to keep the party going, and it's a huge potential source of money. This they can capitalize these high net worth individuals both through some sort of exit taxation and then some sort of citizenship based taxation.
Yeah, and you could even add to that if you're a German and you have sons, or even in the case of Sweden and Denmark, daughters, because they're instituting some form of national service. I believe that the women,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
are exempt from it to an extent. I mean, they can volunteer in old folks' homes, and I believe in Germany it used to be that way, where they had conscription during the Cold War. You could always do a civil service basically job, temporary job where basically they put you to work cleaning things and helping elderly people in the homes and things like that. But now, like, real conscription seems to be really coming back in Europe for both men and women in many cases. So it seems like it would be prudent to also look for Plan B options if you are an affluent or even moderately affluent German and Swede or Dane as well.
Exactly. And that's what I was mentioning earlier. So I have a lot of these clients who say, okay, I'm the wait and see. I'm not going to leave Germany today, but I'm going to set my residency up in Paraguay so it's ready to go. So if they change the laws with regards to taxation or leaving, or if some sort of calamity happens in the world, they've got an additional setup ready to go. Oops. Did I lose you? So one of the uh, one of the things I always tell clients when you actually need a lot of this stuff, it's too late. So whether you're talking tax residency, whether you're talking banking, whatever it is you're talking, um, yeah, I think we ended the stream. Huh. Hello? Well, hey. Well, I guess I'm going to turn my camera off.
Hey, Jerz, sorry, we had a power failure here.
All right, hold on.
All right, we can just wrap up. I don't know. I don't know what happens to the stream. Maybe we should just call it a day here, since if it's okay with you. Let's see here. Looks like we had a power failure. I don't know if it was streaming for several minutes. You still with me?
I'm still with you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Looks like the
perfect.
stream is still live, but yeah, I had to reconnect.
No worries.
Uh,
So,
Go ahead. Let's say just finish your thought. Let's wrap up here because I do have to go in a few minutes, and I know you have to go as well there in Rio.
perfect. So I just wanted to tell everybody a big takeaway from this is if you are waiting till you actually need something, it's too late. So really, to get ahead of the game and to really be successful in this world of internationalization and whatnot, the key is to set yourself up before you actually need the setup. And that's really what we help people do is prepare for what may happen at some point in the future.
All right. Well, thank you, Jerz. This has been a pleasure interviewing you today.
Absolutely.
I wanted to thank you. I do apologize for the technical
No,
difficulties at the end
no
of the
worries.
podcast, but we will have you on next time with a better setup, much better
No
studio
worries.
setup. So that we're in
Okay.
the process of putting together. So I want to thank you again for joining us, and thanks to your wife Gabby for all the work she does, and really enjoy following her X feed in addition to yours.
Appreciate it. Pleasure and look forward to chatting again.
All right. Thank you, Jerz. Have a good evening.
You too. Ciao.